They say weddings are about love, joy, and new beginnings. But for me, that day was a lesson in how quickly people forget the ones who made their happiness possible. At my daughter's wedding, I wasn't the proud mother of the bride. I was an afterthought. My seat, hidden behind a towering bouquet at table 12. I couldn't see the dance floor, the aisle, or even my daughter. I could have been replaced by a potted plant, and no one would have noticed. But I smiled. I smiled because I knew something no one else in that grand ballroom knew. Something that would change everything. 3 days later, the charming groom would be standing in my living room with legal documents in hand, convinced I was too old, too gentle, and too naive to see through his game. Spoiler alert, he was wrong. You see, I wasn't just a widow. I was the keeper of a $33 million secret my late husband entrusted to me before he died. And that secret, it wasn't just money. It was a plan. A plan to protect our family. A plan to outsmart predators. A plan that was about to be put to the test. But let's rewind a bit. The morning of the wedding, I got dressed like I was preparing for battle. Modest gray dress, pearls from my grandmother, and a smile so polite it could pass for weakness. "Mom, you look acceptable," my daughter Emma muttered, barely glancing at me. My heart ached, but I didn't show it. As the ceremony began, I watched from behind the flowers. Emma looked radiant in a vintage lace gown, the only family heirloom we had left. Marcus, her groom, stood confidently in a designer tux, charming everyone with his polished manners and rehearsed laugh. But I noticed something others didn't. Marcus wasn't looking at Emma with love. He was scanning the room, sizing people up like assets. He didn't marry my daughter for love. He married her for opportunity. And he had his sights set on me. Little did he know he wasn't the only one who came prepared. I've always believed that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who smiles and says nothing. That day, it was me. Marcus was working the room like a corporate executive pitching investors. Every smile was calculated, every compliment tailored to build trust. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny and charmed elderly relatives with practiced sincerity. But when he got to me, his smile was different. Softer, slower, measured, as if he were handling a fragile object or a valuable one. "Mrs. Hartley," he said smoothly, "you look lovely today." I tilted my head. "Thank you, Marcus. I see you've learned the art of flattery." He chuckled. "Only when it's true." I watched his eyes. They weren't admiring my dress or my jewelry. They were assessing. That's when I knew he was planning something, and I had just become a target. The reception carried on. Champagne flowed. Speeches were made. Emma glowed with joy, entirely unaware that her husband was already mapping out her family's finances like a conquest. At one point, he leaned in and asked, "Do you live alone, Sylvia?" "Of course. It's been just me since Robert passed." He nodded, thoughtful. "That must be difficult. Managing everything on your own." "Not really. I've had plenty of time to prepare." He smiled again, but there was a flicker in his eyes. That subtle shift when a predator realizes the prey might not be as defenseless as it seems. Later, he casually mentioned a private meeting. "I'd love to discuss a few things with you. Maybe over coffee. Just the two of us. There are financial matters Emma and I have been thinking about." Financial matters. The code phrase of every gold digger in history. I agreed, of course. I wanted to hear everything he had to say, because if Marcus Thornfield thought I was just a lonely old woman living off memories and tea, he was in for the most educational conversation of his life. That night, I opened the drawer where Robert kept his journals. I hadn't touched them since he passed. Each one was filled with notes, ideas, and most importantly, contingency plans. Robert didn't just build a fortune, he built a fortress. and tucked inside one leather-bound notebook was the name Carol Peterson and a note in his handwriting. If anything happens, she'll know what to do. Carol, the woman who'd helped Robert set up protections trusts and hidden accounts. Suddenly, I didn't feel alone at all. I closed the book and smiled. Let the games begin. Wednesday afternoon arrived with the scent of blooming roses and something less pleasant suspicion. Marcus showed up exactly at 3 p.m., as agreed, wearing a navy blazer polished shoes and that smug smile men wear when they think they're the smartest one in the room. In one hand, he held a leather briefcase. In the other, a bottle of wine so expensive it practically screamed bribery. Sylvia, thank you for agreeing to meet, he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. I know this conversation might be uncomfortable, but it's for your protection. Ah, there it was. The script. Concern disguised as control. Help that came with strings. I always appreciate concern, I replied, motioning toward the living room, though I'm curious what I need protection from. He sat down like a man settling in for a pitch. Look, Emma and I care deeply about you. We've been talking, and we think it's important you have legal structures in place. Power of attorney. Consolidation of your accounts. Just in case something happens. Just in case. A phrase that sounds responsible, but often hides selfish motives. I poured him a glass of wine. He talked. I listened. He spoke in soft tones about peace of mind, streamlining responsibilities, and avoiding confusion. But beneath it all, I heard something very different control access power. And greed. Marcus, I said gently, do you think I'm unable to manage my affairs? Of course not, he said too quickly. But you're not getting any younger. These things become more urgent with age. How thoughtful, I said, planning for my decline while I'm still serving dinner. He laughed uncomfortably. No offense meant, none taken. I lied. Then I let him talk himself into a hole. He mentioned a notary. He brought up permanent agreements. He casually dropped phrases like undue influence and mental capacity. All red flags, all weapons. The more he spoke, the clearer it became. Marcus wasn't just hoping to control me. He was expecting me to hand over my life with a grateful smile. But he didn't know I'd already called Carol Peterson. She was reviewing everything. She'd seen men like Marcus before, men who wear suits but hunt for weaknesses. Before he left, I asked him a question. Do you think Robert would have trusted someone like you? There was a pause, a flicker, then a charming smile. I'd like to think so. I nodded, hiding my disgust. As he walked to the door, he said, let's reconvene Monday. I'll bring the notary. We'll keep things simple. Simple. I locked the door behind him and picked up the phone. Carol. I said it's time. By Friday, I had a plan. Marcus believed Monday would be the day he claimed victory when his notary arrived, and I signed away control under the illusion of protection. What he didn't know was that Monday would be his downfall. Carol arrived at my house that morning with a leather folder and the kind of expression you only see on experienced litigators right before a trial. We have everything, she said, placing the folder on the table. We're going to record everything. Conversations, paperwork, timelines. It all becomes evidence. I nodded. He's clever, but not clever enough. Carol smirked. He's the kind of predator who thinks widows are easy targets. That makes him sloppy. We laid out the bait. I would pretend to reconsider, to finally give in. I'd act confused, hesitant, grateful, every stereotype he expected me to be. And Marcus. He'd come in full confidence, ready to pounce. The weekend passed slowly, each hour heavy with anticipation. I practiced my lines. I reviewed the legal traps we'd planted. I rehearsed looking frail. By Sunday night, I sat in Robert's armchair, reading one of his final letters again. They'll think you're weak. Let them. That's when you strike. On Monday at 3 p.m., sharp Marcus arrived. He was all smiles again, dressed like a financial advisor on a magazine cover. He greeted me warmly, introduced his notary, an older gentleman who looked like he'd done this 1,000 times, and opened his briefcase. Carol watched silently from the kitchen doorway, her phone discreetly recording. "Let's start here," Marcus said, pointing to the signature page of the power of attorney document. "This just gives Emma and me the authority to help you manage your finances, nothing binding unless you want it to be." Lies. Every word coded in charm. I played my part beautifully. I asked innocent questions. I pretended not to understand clauses. I even feigned forgetting my reading glasses. "Don't worry," Marcus soothed. "That's why we're here. To help you." Then just as I picked up the pen, I paused. "There's something I should mention," I said, voice trembling slightly. "I think there might be more money than you realize." Marcus froze. His pupils dilated. His posture stiffened. "How much more?" he asked, casual tone forced. "Robert had some investments I wasn't aware of." I found a letter and a safe. He leaned in. "Did you open it?" "Not yet." That was the moment the trap snapped shut. Carol stepped forward. "Mr. Thornfield, this entire interaction has been documented. Based on what we've gathered, we'll be pursuing charges of attempted financial coercion and elder fraud. You are being investigated." His face went pale. "You're bluffing," he hissed. Carol handed him a printed list. "These are your known shell companies. This is your gambling debt." And here she pointed to a page. "Is the investment scheme you tried on another widow last year. She died, but her son filed a complaint." Silence filled the room like smoke. Then Marcus stood face twisting with rage. "You'll regret this." I stood too, holding his gaze. "No, you will." After Marcus stormed out the house, fell into an eerie quiet. Carol and I didn't speak for a few seconds. We just stood there listening to the silence wrap around us like a storm preparing its second wave. Finally, Carol exhaled. That was textbook manipulation. And now we have everything we need. We backed up all the recordings, photos of the documents, and Carol immediately contacted a federal investigator she knew from her elder protection work. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, we dug deep into Marcus's past. Carol, with her vast legal network, pulled strings. We discovered that Marcus wasn't just trying to exploit me. He had a history of it. A well-disguised pattern of targeting older women, manipulating them under the guise of care, and walking away with control over their finances. And Emma. She still had no idea. She visited 2 days later, her face glowing from the honeymoon. "Mom, Marcus said everything went well with the papers. I'm glad you're finally letting someone help you." I stared at her, stunned by how completely he twisted the narrative. He said that I asked softly. She nodded. "He said you agreed to move forward with the legal arrangements, and that you even offered to show him some documents from Dad's estate." I nearly laughed. "No, sweetheart, that's not what happened." And for the first time, I told her the truth. I told her about the recordings, about the notary, about the trap we'd laid, and how Marcus had walked right into it. Emma's face fell. Her joy vanished, replaced by confusion, then horror. "But why would he do that?" I held her hand gently. "Because men like Marcus don't fall in love with people. They fall in love with access, to power, to money." She didn't speak for a while, just stared into the distant jaw, clenched, blinking rapidly. Then she whispered, "What happens now?" I showed her the file Carol had compiled, gambling debts, offshore accounts, a deceased widow with a similar signature on her estate papers, and 3 pending lawsuits in other states. Emma's hands shook as she read through it. "He married me." "Just for this," she said. "Not just you," I replied. "You were the door to me. and I was the vault. That night, Emma stayed with me. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, her head resting against my shoulder as she cried silently. And I didn't say I told you so. I just said, "You're not the only one he tried to break, but you're going to be the first one who fights back." By midweek, Marcus's carefully woven mask was unraveling thread by thread. Carol had handed everything over to Agent Torres, a relentless federal investigator with a personal vendetta against elder fraud. Within hours, his team had begun dissecting Marcus's financials, phone records, email trails, anything that could expose how deep this rabbit hole went. What they found shocked even Carol. Marcus wasn't acting alone. He was part of a network, a quiet, coordinated web of predators who specialized in targeting elderly individuals with inheritances, pensions, and property. Shell companies' fake investment firms forged documents. The system was elaborate, organized, and were successful. Dozens of victims, some robbed, some institutionalized, some already dead. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table staring at a photo of Robert, remembering his final letter. Protect what we built. Use every tool. Use every dollar. For the first time, I truly understood what he meant. This wasn't just about me anymore. The next morning, I met Carol and Agent Torres in a small conference room downtown. On the table were folders, laptops, and legal pads scribbled with names, dates, and dollar amounts. Mrs. Hartley Torres began, "We believe Marcus is responsible for stealing over $4.2 million from at least 6 other individuals, 3 of whom are now deceased." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Carol spoke next. "We're coordinating with prosecutors in 3 states, but we need your help." "My help?" I asked. "We want to use your case as the cornerstone, the one that blows this network open. We can't subpoena half these records unless a named victim is willing to press charges and testify." I nodded slowly. "You'll have it." They both looked relieved. But I wasn't done yet. I also want to fund something, a permanent program, one that teaches elderly people how to defend themselves. Legal workshops, scam awareness, psychological recovery, all of it. Torres blinked. "You'd be willing to fund a federal initiative? I have the money and a mission." Carol leaned in, eyes fierce. "We start with Marcus. Then we burn the rest of them down." That weekend, subpoenas went out. And Marcus, he had no idea the storm was coming. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. Marcus was on his way to a client meeting, which we later learned was a code phrase for pitching another elderly widow on a fraudulent investment, when federal agents intercepted him outside a luxury cafe downtown. He looked calm at first, polished, confident. Then he saw Agent Torres. And then he saw Carol. They said he didn't resist, but the video captured by a passing pedestrian told another story of a man shouting about misunderstandings, family matters, and vindictive women. It went viral in under an hour. By evening, the news broke prominent financial advisor, arrested in multi-state elder fraud investigation. I watched it on my living room television, tea in hand, heart thundering. Emma was beside me, silent. When Marcus appeared on the screen, disheveled, confused, and handcuffed, she didn't flinch. But she didn't smile either. "I loved him," she whispered. "Or I thought I did." I reached for her hand. "Love doesn't excuse betrayal," I said, "and it certainly doesn't require silence." The next few days were a flurry of legal motions, bail hearings, and headlines. More victims came forward, some anonymous, some brave enough to speak on record. A woman in Arizona, a retired librarian in Chicago, even a former nun. They all had the same story: charm, trust paperwork, then ruin. Carol and Torres began building what they called the blueprint indictment, a case so thorough it could dismantle the entire fraud ring. But what none of them expected was this. The case drew attention, national attention. I received a call from a senator's office. Mrs. Hartley, the voice said, "We'd like you to testify in front of the Elder Justice Subcommittee. Your case has become a landmark example." I froze. Me, a quiet widow in pearls. But Robert's words echoed in my head again. "You're stronger than they think." So I said yes. The hearing room was colder than I expected. Marble columns, cameras lining the walls, rows of suited politicians all flipping through briefings they probably skimmed that morning. At the center of it all, a witness chair with a single microphone. I'd worn my sharpest navy blazer, Robert's diamond earrings, and the calmest expression I could manage. But my hands trembled slightly. Carol squeezed my shoulder before I sat. "You've already won, Sylvia. This is legacy." When the chairman called my name, the room hushed. "Mrs. Sylvia Hartley, you may begin." I looked at them, at the cameras, at the faces of people who still didn't quite believe that a widow with a quiet voice could destroy a criminal empire. So I made them believe. I told them everything about the wedding, the flower arrangement, the trap, the safe in the basement. Marcus, his lies, his network. But more than that, I told them about the others. The librarian in Chicago who lost her home. The veteran in Nevada who died alone in a care facility bankrupt. The woman who thought she was marrying someone who loved her. Each name, each number, each piece of proof. By the end, the silence was thick with outrage. Then came the questions. Mrs. Hartley, one senator asked, "What do you recommend as a legislative remedy?" I looked at him steady. "Make elder fraud a federal crime, punishable by life imprisonment. Make it so expensive and terrifying that no rational predator dares attempt it." Another asked, "Isn't life imprisonment extreme?" "No, Senator. Robbing an elderly person of their independence is a life sentence. The punishment should match the crime." The room erupted in applause. Reporters swarmed the hallway as I left. "Mrs. Hartley, are you afraid of retaliation?" "No," I said. "They should be afraid of me." 3 months after the hearing, the Sylvia Hartley Initiative was launched. It started modestly, just a single hotline and a small office in Chicago, staffed by retired lawyers, social workers, and volunteers. But within weeks, the calls started pouring in. Hundreds, then thousands. People didn't just need justice. They needed to be heard. Widows, veterans, retirees, people who had lost not just their savings but their dignity. Carol became the national director. Torres was seconded to the Justice Department. And me, I became the voice. TV interviews, town halls, legislation briefings. I stood behind podiums and told my story until it wasn't just mine, it was everyone's. Marcus, meanwhile, was denied bail. The weight of the federal indictment crushed every legal trick his team tried to pull. The shell companies were exposed. Fake accounts seized. Associates arrested. In total, 67 arrests. 49 federal convictions. Over $80 million recovered. And Marcus. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. No parole. No early release. The courtroom was packed the day the sentence was read. I sat in the front row beside Emma, who now worked with the initiative full-time. Marcus glared at me as they led him away. "This isn't over, old woman," he spat. I didn't flinch. "It is," I said quietly. But what none of us expected came next. The initiative grew faster than we could manage. State governments offered grants. Survivors offered to volunteer. The media dubbed us the Army of Widows. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't known I missed. Purpose. 6 months later, I stood in the East Room of the White House. The chandeliers sparkled. A military string quartet played softly in the background. Around me were scientists, civil rights leaders, and war heroes. and one widow in pearls. They called my name, recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, for her relentless pursuit of justice and her work to protect vulnerable elders. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and shook the president's hand. Flashes went off. Applause echoed through the room. But what mattered most wasn't the medal. It was what came after. The press, the partnerships, the legislation. Congress passed the Elder Protection and Financial Fraud Prevention Act, modeled after our initiative. The program became federal, permanent, and self-funded through seized criminal assets. We opened centers in every major city. We trained law enforcement, created education kits for families, built an early warning system for scams, and perhaps most importantly, we gave victims a voice. 1 year later, I gave a speech in front of 3,000 people. I ended with this: you can choose to be helpless, or you can choose to be terrifying to those who try to hurt you. I chose terrifying, and I hope you do too. The crowd stood. The applause lasted minutes. Emma stood beside me, smiling stronger than ever. As we drove home, I looked at the sky and whispered, "Robert, I used every tool, every dollar, just like you asked." A soft breeze rustled through the trees, and in that moment, I knew we didn't just win. We changed the game. Forever.